My guest today is Cheryl Kuba. Cheryl is a gerontologist, a humorist, an author, and a professional in healthcare and aging for more than 30 years. Cheryl's audiences both laugh and cry over her stories about her own family and how to celebrate the funny nuggets of joy in every day and in the final chapters of life. She's uniquely qualified to make family caretakers feel enriched and empowered. Her insight is second to none regarding the double-tiered sandwich generation, Alzheimer's disease, how the rational aged become irrational, role reversal, and guilt. It was Cheryl's personal experience with not one, but two sets of aging parents that proved to be both a tremendous challenge and a world full of love and success. Wow, welcome, Cheryl. I'm sure you've got a lot to tell us about today. How are you?
I'm great. And Dr. Carson, thank you so much for having me on your program today.
Well, this is such a serious incident that we're talking about today. I mean, you hear so many celebrities that now have Alzheimer's. You see it all the time. I guess, in fact, I was reading, I don't know if I was reading or it was on television. There's a particular family that gets early onset Alzheimer's in their mid-40s, and when they traced it back, it was a grandparent, the great-grandparent. I mean, there's so many of us that are involved with aging parents. And I'm a healthcare surrogate for a speaker friend of ours, and she's 94, and so there's still a lot going on there. So we hear about so many individuals becoming immersed and taking care of their parents. So I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, who is typically the family caregiver?
Sure. Well, if we take the theme from that popular TV show right now that is This Is Us, caregiving today is truly This Is Us. The majority of the family caregivers are women between the age of 45 and 55, although as people are living longer, that high end goes into, 65 and beyond. And usually it is taking care of parents, although it can certainly be taking care of an aunt or a speaker friend, as you just said. Many, many people taking care of neighbors. And all of us primarily are in the not only baby boomer generation, but the sandwich generation, where we have aging parents or aging aunts and uncles that we're caring for, and yet some of us still have children in the home or children who are still dependent on us. And the average caregiver, which is usually a woman, as I said before, carves out 18 hours a week caring for aging parents. So if you look at what would be a 40-hour work week, which we know that doesn't exist anymore either, and then you have to put an additional 18 hours of care into the mix for a family member, it's tough.
Well, it's interesting because I knew the answer was going to be a woman. And the other thing is that even if it's the male spouse's family and parents, it seems that it falls to the women to take over the task, even when it's not their own parents. So where do men fit into all of this?
Well, men are surprisingly 44% of the caregivers in America are men. And we don't know, you don't see it and you don't hear about it because men feel very isolated. They don't share their feelings on what's going on. And typically, now this is going to sound like an old phrase, but men never ask for directions before GPS, so they don't ask for help. Women will ask for help from other women, from professionals, but men really feel isolated. When I was doing the research for my book, I had segregated groups, focus groups, and one of women and one of men who were were care managers. And to a person, each man thought he was the only one in this position. And there they were in a focus group of 15 other men who had the exact same thing going on. And they were all a little bit shell-shocked about, oh, this has happened to you? Oh, really? You do this? It's kind of amazing.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because I know certainly there are men who do that, but it seems to be the majority are women. But you also took a very unique approach when you wrote your book, Navigating the Journey of Aging Parents. So, what is so different about your book than the other books in that aging parent genre?
When I was doing my research, I found out that there were mountains of books about what caregivers should do for their aging parents. However, all of those books that I found were written by you and me, the adult children of aging parents, and they all said, "This is what I think my mom needs to do. This is why I think my dad needs to give up the keys." So I did a 180 and I went out and asked the dependent elderly how they would like this whole scenario handled. I asked them about giving up the keys. I asked them about moving in with their daughter, moving into a retirement community or nursing home. And the answers were amazing. With all this research, I found very little where people had gone to the source and said, "How do you feel about this?" I have to say right now I am traveling and I am staying with my 98-year-old uncle who is very lucid, very with it, and I'm hearing stories that I have never heard before. It's amazing.
When you say stories you haven't heard before, what kind of stories are you talking about?
Just today, Dr. Carson, I found out that he was an Eagle Scout and I never knew it. I also found out that several years ago he met President Obama, and I hadn't heard about that. And we're in touch constantly, and lots of things about World War II, lots of things about the Navy, just very interesting details
and heartwarming things.
Very much so.
Interesting. So I know that if you are a caregiver and if you are doing it for 18 hours, that almost seems like a little amount from what I heard from a lot of people.
Sure.
What three things can they do immediately to be, to keep their sanity? Because it is difficult.
And caregivers need to keep their sanity and they need to take back their lives. The first is ask for help. People genuinely want to help you. There are professionals out there who you can go to, such as care managers, social workers. There are support groups at hospitals, at churches. And because the majority of people, especially your listeners, are in the baby boom generation, the people right down the street are in the same boat. It's 1 in 4 households that have a family member who needs care. So you must ask for help because you can't go down this road alone. Second thing is that adage that we hear on the airplane is take care of yourself first. Put on your own oxygen mask first before you help an older adult or a small child. You have to take care of yourself. You have to look at your health. You have to look at your own relationships and not let your relationships with your own children and your spouse or your partner fall apart. And that's a tough thing to do. Third thing is involve the elderly in every decision where you possibly can, because too often, and we've seen this when we've taken an aging parent to the doctor talks to us. They don't talk to the person who's actually there for the appointment. Involve them. Maybe, maybe they don't want to move in with you. Maybe they would just rather stay where they are and, and bring in outside help or something. But if possible, involve them in all the decisions.
Yeah, those are 3 really, really good advice pieces, because I can tell you that, how somebody who is older views who and what they are and how we see it is totally different. Mm-hmm. I know my mom lived to 99 and a half and she was totally with it. And boy, you couldn't tell her much. I mean, she had her own opinions about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But there's also, I think, a really important question that you talk about, and that is, supposing there are 3, 4, 5 kids in a family, and one person has the responsibility of being the family caregiver. Now, it may be because they are the person that's closest geographically. It could be because they are the closest emotionally. It could be because they're the only one that wants to take that responsibility. So what happens to the relationships with other family members when this happens?
Well, my advice would be get a family meeting going as quickly as possible when you see that there are problems with the parent. And there are good times to have these meetings. One is the day after Thanksgiving. Most families gather for Thanksgiving, and it's the one son or daughter who sees the changes in mom or dad and says, you know what, we need to rally. Maybe mom or dad are closer to one of the kids. In my own family, there were three of us, and I could talk to my dad about things that the other two couldn't talk to him about. And I was finally the one who spoke to him about moving out of their home and moving into a retirement community. My dad and I went out to lunch one day to this fabulous place called Burger King. It was a high-end lunch. And we were just able to talk, and he said, well, I can do the shopping, I can do the cooking. And I said, Dad, we know this is all about you. You are very capable. But my mom at the time had Alzheimer's disease, and if something happened to him, she couldn't call 911. So sometimes you have to shift the focus. And then if there is a son or daughter who's been on the outs with the parent, they're not the one that you really want to have right in the center of the decision making. And this is also the time during these discussions not to bring up old family strife, not to bring up, why you didn't get the car when you were 18, et cetera, et cetera. And some families will do that. And we have heard a lot of stories and seen a lot of cases where there's a prodigal son or daughter that just happens to come back when maybe some of the family money is going to be given out. I've also unfortunately seen cases where the prodigal son or daughter doesn't come back until the death has occurred. So you need to designate somebody in the family who can communicate with the parent and be close to them. And I don't mean close geographically, but somebody who can talk them through it and involve them in every decision.
Well, though, it's interesting because still, I'm sure that the other kids have a situation where they want to put their 2 cents in. And when they haven't been involved in the day-to-day care, it's a difficult thing. And then, of course, the caregiver themselves could be dealing with guilt or regret or remorse. And now that the roles are reversed, I will tell you, though, there were things that my sister and I both did for my mom. My sister and her daughter were great at insurance and making sure she got what she needed and that kind of thing. And she was where my mom was. But my mom used to come down and spend every winter with me. And I was good for other things. My mother told my sister at one time, she never told this to me, but she told to my sister that my sister took care of her, but I was her soulmate. And I thought that was quite an interesting comparison because I would have thought it was totally the opposite. So it just shows you, again, perception. But, a very serious question. You've got a lot of experience, both personally and professionally, with Alzheimer's disease, and it is not getting any less. It is getting more. So what tips can you give for someone caring for a relative with either dementia or Alzheimer's? This is such a crucial question.
Dr. Carson, it's like walking on a frozen pond and you're not really quite sure how thick the ice is. And you continue to walk across that pond because you can't turn around. In my family, as you mentioned, my mother had Alzheimer's disease for 8 years. Her mother had it for 10. And then my mother-in-law had dementia. So we had an awful lot of problems. And then I had I have the professional background. One of the things that I talk to families about is live in the moment with your relative. It's not important that they can't remember your brother's name or that they've called the mailman, the ice cream man. What's important is that they live in the moment. And, some adult children and some other family members get very, very frustrated because they don't want to be called the wrong name, or they'll argue with somebody who has Alzheimer's. You never, ever want to argue. They can't help it. that they can't remember a name, or they can't remember that they, have said the same thing 5